All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hopping on our webinar today. It's been just amazing the response that we've got from these webinars with what's happening within this carbon intensity space. Obviously, has me really excited and must have a lot of you guys excited too, because I'm just overwhelmed by the amount of registrations and people that we're getting on here. And I know joined by folks from all over the world. Again, like we've been in our last couple webinars. I'm going to go through a variety of different things here. Got some slides to tee some stuff up. On my side, I'm Mitchell Hora. I'm the founder and CEO of Continuum Ag, and we're a soil health data company based in Washington, Iowa. I'm a farmer as well, and we've been hosting these webinars about carbon intensity and the things that are happening within the carbon, specifically within scope 3 carbon space. And going to continue to dig into that, really leading up to our June 5th webinar, or our June 5th TopSoil Summit, our summer conference and field day that we'll be hosting. Just a variety of things that we want to start the discussions on. This space is really exciting in my eyes. And I'm going to dig into some of the scoring systems here today. Continuum Ag, like I said, we've got a software for helping to enable some of this. We'll show you guys what we've been doing. We've got the guy who wrote the book on our software, wrote the code and drives all of that here as my guest today. But the key thing here as we talk about carbon is that keep in mind, carbon is the bonus outcome of good soil health regenerative management. We've got to start with that. Start with good agronomy, focus on controlling what you can control on your farm, managing input costs, reducing tillage, using cover crops, utilizing these principles. That is the core focus, but carbon and other environmental outcomes, I believe, are going to pose a massive opportunity financially, but also as we need to advocate for agriculture and market and tell our story. So I'm going to continue to dig into that, but wanted to tee that up. My guest today is Dr. Kaustu Bolero, and today's topic is all about the data, the scoring system, how carbon intensity really works from a measurement perspective, a little bit of the kind of overview on that. Our previous webinars have been recorded. We're recording this one as well. They're on our YouTube page. If you search Continuum Ag on YouTube, we've got a playlist where we've put some of the webinars before. So we've already talked about carbon intensity 101 and kind of the high level, the 45Z tax credits, the Inflation Reduction Act, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, low carbon fuels. We already talked about that. And we already talked about carbon insetting versus offsetting with Matt Rollick from ARVA. And now today we're going to really dig into the data and how the model and how the systems really work. So yeah, my guest today, Dr. Kaustu Bolero. He has a company called Soil Diagnostics and a variety of different things going on. I'll let him introduce himself. He's also our head plumber with Continuum Ag is what he we jokingly say, but Kaustu is our lead software developer and runs our team of software developers. At Kaustu, maybe you can cue some of that up, a little bit more of an intro, but formerly University of Illinois, was a professor there for 15 years. So, and is still in the Champaign, Illinois area. So very, very deeply ingrained in all this, and the ideal candidate to be my guest for this webinar. So I'm going to let Kaustu introduce himself a little bit more. Then we're going to get into carbon intensity, what the heck carbon intensity is, kind of a little bit of an overview, and talk a little bit about the Argonne National Lab and GREET, why Argonne National Lab, why GREET, that kind of stuff, and then really digging into the meat and potatoes. How does the GREET model work? How are we working with it? What have we built at Continuum Ag with our TopSoil software to automate and simplify the process for our customers? And then what are we doing to help farmers to improve their scores and provide those recommendations so that farmers can improve? If you've got questions, we can definitely take them throughout. We've got some time at the end And I know I'll be kind of jumping in with a variety of questions as well. Put questions in the chat if you would like to throughout the webinar here as well. Kaustubh, anything else? Maybe you can intro. Thank you for taking the time and being my guest here today. Kaustubh and I have been working together for 2.5 years. I mean, it's been a while that we've been building some stuff, and yeah, have built a software from scratch to now over 1 million acres and across 43 states and 20 countries. So I think we're on to something here, Kaustubh. But
yeah,
anyway, I'll pass it over to you. I'll help run your slides. But again, yeah, thanks for being here. Maybe intro yourself, anything I missed, and we'll dig right in.
Well, thank you very much, Mitchell. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the early introduction. I love calling myself the plumber because I see myself as the guy who makes the data flow from one place to another, right? And so writing software is just the reason to make data flow from one place to another, or the mechanism by which data flows. But yeah, so Kaustubh Bharerao, I got my PhD from Ohio State in the area of ag engineering, and I built a career, had tenure at the University of Illinois also in ag engineering. About 2014, 2015, I started a company called Soil Diagnostics with the express idea of automating soil testing and being able to provide better recommendations. Right? So the original theme of that company was actually, how do you reduce nitrogen? I'm in Illinois. Reducing nitrogen is an obvious sort of a use case here, and it just, by virtue of where I was, is how I got introduced to the problem. About 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I took a hard look at my academic career. All was going well. I had some grants and I was trying to finish up. But I also saw that more people were using my software and my systems than were reading my journal articles. And so rather than go down the route of getting promoted to full professor and so on, I decided to bail out of the university, and haven't looked back since. So almost a day after I think I left is when Mitchell's friend and our mutual friend got us in touch with each other, and we just said, hey, this looks perfect. Let's just jump right into it and start building what today is TopSoil. And again, Mitchell and his team are at the forefront of introducing sustainability and regenerative practice ideas in a bite-by-bite manner, right? So there's a coaching piece in there, and there's the ability to actually help someone transition from a completely conventional agriculture to something completely regenerative. And they've broken it down into nice, manageable chunks with a lot of information and a lot of first-hand experience that almost nobody has today. And while we were working on this, the idea of this GREET model came up, right? So we were working closely with farmers, trying to show the pathway towards reducing nitrogen while boosting yields. And lo and behold, this GREET model actually comes around and enshrines it in the tax code, at least for the near term, and really gives it the ability to sort of get down to a single number, a single score, right? And so it transforms all of these complexities that we were handling with growers on a day-to-day basis to a single number, and that allows us to evaluate practices side to side, side by side, right? So Argonne National Labs right here in the Chicago area, and they had people who were developing these metrics for how do you evaluate the environmental cost of producing biofuels. And so they came up with this unit of greenhouse gas equivalents, effective CO2 units per unit of production of energy, right? So they've actually taken this score and cast it into grams of greenhouse gas per bushel of production, either corn or beans, or grams of greenhouse gas per megajoule, per million joules of energy that's produced from the feedstock, from the biofuel, from the plant matter. And just as a comparison, the scores for gasoline are 92.7, right? So you're essentially spending $92 to get $100 of gasoline energy, right? You can think of it in that way. Similarly, for corn ethanol, it's 52. It's a lot better than pulling fuel straight out of the ground. And if you use corn as a contributor, then it's down to about 29.1. And contributor means that it's actually correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also the contribution of soil organic carbon that gets
Yeah.
sequestered in the soil.
So what I was looking at here in prepping for this, and as Kaustubh and I were putting this together, just looking at, okay, what is, with the carbon intensity score, this is a different metric than what we've been looking at with carbon. Okay, carbon has been being looked at as a ton of CO2 equivalents. This is in grams of CO2 equivalents per unit of production, whether that be a bushel or megajoule from an energy perspective. And basically, yeah, as we're looking at this, all the different fuels have their own like kind of standard carbon intensity number. Gasoline, this is from one of the sources. I was finding a variety of different numbers depend on different sources, and then different forms of gasoline and renewable, and like there's just so many variations of some of these fuels and stuff. But this article from Argonne National Lab, had gasoline as kind of the standard with a standard carbon intensity of 92.7. This specific article had corn ethanol at 52.4. I've heard some ethanol plants have different scores. Every single plant has its own score. But in this article, I had ethanol at 52.4. Of ethanol's carbon intensity, corn is 29.1 of those points. And we're going to get into that. And that corn component is where we help farmers to document what is their score, what is their corn's carbon intensity as part of the total 52.4 points. I've seen 56 also be kind of a standard for corn ethanol. But then as you're looking at other feedstuffs, of course, every single one's going to be a little bit different. But the key thing here, our point of this is gasoline is 92. Ethanol gets blended in and it's lower, and it helps to lower the overall carbon intensity at the pump. And that's really the point.
Right. And the lower, the better. So there will always be some variation around the numbers based on the amount of nitrogen you ended up using and the yield and the location where you are. But the lower you can push it, the bigger difference you can show with your default in the area, with the sort of expected number in the area, the better off you're going to be. So again, Argonne National Lab is a US DOE lab. It's in the Chicago area, and it's also a lot of the people there have appointments at the University of Chicago. So this GREET tool is it's actually a GREET ecosystem of models, right? It's a very large set of equations and databases that the teams at Argonne have put together. It stands for the Greenhouse Gases, Regulated Emissions, and Energy Use in Transportation model. But their objective has been to reduce this complexity of agriculture and carbon capture and soil organic matter and transportation and liquid fuels and refineries and all of that stuff down to a single number. Now, as simplistic as that is, having a number like this makes it easy for the regulators up in DC to do something about it, right? So they can say, yes, I like this number. The lower it gets, the better, and I'm willing to put some real money behind it, right? And so the Inflation Reduction Act specifically states that the 45Z tax credit calculation, that the tax credit calculation will use this GREET model, not because it's the best, but because it's the simplest. And that's interesting, and it's an important one. And certainly having Argonne be a DOE thing helps, right? And so that's the dynamics of the DC thing.
That's what I was going to say. Is it's a U.S. Department of Energy owned tool, and it's a federal, tax credit. So they're going to utilize kind of their own tools. I totally agree. It's definitely, as an agronomist, I know it's got a long way to go. I'm sure the tool will continue to evolve, and I'm already hearing about a lot of work being done to improve the tool. And it's built on top of some of these existing biogeochemical models. I believe it's got DACENT tied into it. Maybe some stuff from DNDC. Is that what we're seeing too? Like at least DACENT for sure being tied in. That it's just boils it down to one number. And what I like about it is I think that farmers need kind of that scoreboard and a point system and to have an understanding of how to score points, and the financial structure needs to reward the point structure. And I think this finally does that. We've got a scoreboard with the GREET tool. We understand how to score points, and we're going to show you guys that. and we know how to optimize the points. And it looks like, whether it be with 45Z or whether it be with the low carbon fuel markets like in California and Canada, or these emerging opportunities, that there's emerging marketplaces based on the points that you actually score. So, Kaustubh, I thought your model here laid this out really well. So let's dig into this.
Right. So this picture isn't mine. It comes from the GREET model's technical manual for the feedstock. Right. So the GREET model is split into a number of smaller models, one of which is the feedstock carbon intensity calculator. Right. So that's the FDCIC. And what this does, and this is actually, when we say GREET model, we are actually specifically talking about this. We're not talking about transportation and logistics and some of the other pieces that are part of it. But here, what you see in the left side box with the red heading, the brick colored heading there, that is really the GREET model that's relevant to us as in agriculture, right? And so it's looking at the whole life cycle of that fuel, all the way from all the energy inputs in the fuel and the number of passes you make on the field and all of that stuff that goes into producing that unit of energy on the field, all the way to when it is combusted in your internal combustion engine and it's released as total emissions out the other end, right? So that entire life cycle is modeled in the FDCIC piece of the GREET model. And what we are mostly concerned with, what we can affect, is the thing that you see on the red side, right? And so again, there's a lot going on here. The green blocks are really important to look at carefully if you want to look at it. Basically, we're looking at what is the cost of, in terms of carbon, what is the cost of inputs that are going into the field, primarily your ammonia, your urea, all of that stuff. And then what does it take to actually produce that biomass on your field, right? And once you deliver that biomass at your elevator, if you have the data that goes along with it to that point, then they can take that and then do something with it beyond that point. Right?
Yeah, they're gonna have to prove that all of these pieces are legit, and there's a lot of moving parts to this as laid out here. And for farmers, we're looking at, just the stuff on the left, just the farm gate activities, but it's part of a much larger equation.
Right. And then this alone fits in a much larger equation again.
Yeah.
Right? This,
as it's blended and as it's taken actually to the end consumer. Yeah. And looking at, like, there's transportation in here, there's, all of those processes, every single step along the way, which is why I think maybe it's taken a little while of trying other angles to carbon without going to this, other carbon initiatives that are saying, hey, let's just focus on cover crop and reduce tillage. And that's it. Not looking at the more holistic picture. But I do think that more holistic angle is where we have to land eventually. It just takes making all the data flow and plumb into this. Hence having Kaustubh the plumber to help to make all of this go and make all this data be integrated in together, and just trying to make it as simple as we can.
Right. And even as if you're a grower and you're trying to figure out what this, is any of this relevant beyond when the product leaves your farm gate? I think if you're going to one elevator versus the next, and they have different costs associated with how they process and transport and things like that, they might be able to give you a different price for your corn. And that might affect how you think about things, right? So realize that they are also part of this ecosystem and they are doing their own calculations as well. And so I think, that might just give you a little bit more insight into why prices are the way they are, or what they're offering is the way it is.
Yeah. So looking at all of these different pieces, but now we're going to dial it in to just the on-farm side of things.
Right. So once this GREET tool was released, what we did was a deep dive into how does this model behave, right? Like, it's nice to see a picture, but what exactly happens when you start throwing in different numbers? And so we essentially looked at all of the different inputs that go into your activity, into your farming activity. And we also looked at all the different mechanisms by which, or management mechanisms by which these activities result in different outcomes. So for instance, we looked at what happens under conventional tillage, what happens under reduced tillage, no-till, if you add on cover crops, and if you do cover crops with no-till, what is the difference? The couple things I want to highlight for you are that on the left-hand side graph, there is a zero line way at the top there, right? And what we're looking at below the zero line is reduction in the CI score relative to your local area. Okay, so we did this analysis. Let's pretend we're in Washington, Iowa, and this graph is for Washington, Iowa. If you did conventional tillage, then your GREET score will be higher than what the average GREET score is in Washington, Iowa, because most farmers are already engaged in some form of reduced tillage or 4 hours and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so if you did everything conventional, you're going to be worse off than the neighborhood GREET score. And then as you add on more and more regenerative practices, your GREET score plummets. And remember, a lower GREET score is a good thing, right? So what the 45Z tax credit is evaluated on is how much lower your score is relative to where the rest of the farmers are in that county. So a couple things to note here. This advantage is a temporary one, and so is the tax credit. So that should be understood. Like if everyone went to a no-till cover crop system, the advantage would evaporate. So I think there is a very small amount of time in which one can seriously jump on this and benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's based on that relative number. So essentially, it's not quite this simple, but I had mentioned, that corn kind of has a standard national standard of 29.1. That would essentially be this zero number, the baseline 29.1. If you're doing conventional tillage, it's actually worse than the baseline number. The standard, the initial default is a reduced tillage. And as you go to no-till, you reduce your score, your carbon intensity score. But adding cover crop is the main point of this graph. Adding cover crop gains a lot of points relative to everything else. But so adding cover crop, reducing tillage, it's some of these same regenerative practices that move the carbon offset systems. But now when we're looking at carbon intensity, it's the same type of practices, just a different unit of outcomes. So the point of that graph on the left is that it's cover crop is item number one, essentially, to improve your score. Also use no-till or reduce till at the minimum. But going to the graph on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, there's all these columns and they're a little bit hard to understand. The main takeaway from this was the check the box practices of use cover crops and use no-till. But on the right-hand side, we get into the individual line items themselves.
Right. So it's the left side is like the big knob that you can turn, the big change you can make globally. And then on the right side is specific agronomic practices that you can use to improve your score. So on the right side, I'm showing you only a very small segment of the analysis here. But what we did was, let's just take reduced tillage for one sec and just change the amount of each of these inputs by a small amount, right? So what we're looking at is how sensitive is that CI score to small changes in single factors that you're using, right? So if you change your ammonium nitrate by 10%, how much does your CI score get affected? If you change your urea use by 10%, how much does your CI score get changed, right? Everything else remaining the same. So we did this analysis, and lo and behold, the biggest reduction and this is a little harder to read graph, but you can see that the bottoms of those graphs are really the baseline there, right?
Yeah.
The flat line at the bottom there, right there. And then if you see, the biggest reduction in CI score comes from boosting your yield. So keeping everything else the same, this is important. Keeping your nitrogen input the same, if you can increase your corn yield, you're going to get a more favorable CI score.
Yep.
Right. And on the other hand, keeping everything the same, if you actually increase your nitrogen inputs or energy inputs, your CI score is going to be worse off. So so basically, what it boils down to is you want to maximize the number of bushels of corn per unit of nitrogen used.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Essentially, that bushel, that's your denominator. So the bigger your denominator, the more you're spreading those inputs across, the lower your carbon intensity score. So if you keep everything the same and are just in a reduced tillage system or any of them, if you keep everything the same and get more yield, like choosing the right hybrid, maybe using a biological product, split applying like your nitrogen at the right times, just good agronomic management to improve that yield, or just have good weather, of course, too, you're going to be able to have a lower carbon intensity score. If you have poor weather, poor yields, it's going to be tough to get a really low carbon intensity score. So also tying in, every field is going to be different. Every year is going to be different because your yield is always going to be different.
Right.
So, but yeah, then it's the nitrogen and stuff, though, is where you're getting at there. So on the left-hand side, we're showing, okay, cover crop and no-till are big. On the right-hand side, it's grow more yield and do it with less synthetic inputs.
Right. So again, one other subtlety to point out here, if you look at the left side graph, the tallest purple bars or the longest purple bars are actually corresponding to gasoline there, right? And what that says is that gasoline actually has the biggest impact pound for pound on your CI score, but you don't use that much gasoline. You end up using a lot more ammonia, for instance, on the field, right? And so if you control for the volume of how much you're using, then it starts showing up, right? The gasoline, you're not going to be able to change a whole lot. You might go to a smaller engine, you might go to fewer passes. Same thing with diesel, but there are practices by which you could reduce your nitrogen to 40% if you did them right? Not immediately and not in the same year, but certainly on certain lands and in certain cases, you could definitely do that.
Right. If you're using 6 gallons of 6 gallons of diesel fuel per acre, and if you reduce by 1 gallon of diesel fuel, that could be, maybe a couple passes across the field. Like that's a big impact. But since it's only 6 gallons, you don't have that much wiggle room to move versus 240 units of nitrogen. You got a lot bigger wiggle room to move the needle. So that's where you're getting at there.
Right. And it also tells us that there's a trade-off, right? So as you make more split applications, you're going to increase your diesel bill, but you're probably going to cut back on your nitrogen bill. And there is a trade-off there that we need to worry about. So that brings us to our next point. Like, how do we actually take one more slide?
Yeah, one other couple points, and looking at some of the chat here too. That Sean sent me a message. Yeah, that it's the efficiencies here is what it rewards. Continue to drive big yields, but do it more efficiently. What I also like in this graph here too is it really highlights the early adopters. If you're already doing some of these things, you already have a really good score compared to somebody that maybe isn't improving some of their nutrient use efficiencies with split applications or stabilizers or biologicals, somebody that isn't already doing a reduced till or a no-till and a cover crop system. So rewarding those early adopters, rewarding folks that are able to still drive yield, because we still have to have production, which is why I like this whole system here. We still got to produce, but we need to do it with optimum amount of synthetic inputs, reduce diesel fuel, reduce energy usage, and utilize these conservation practices, just much more holistic. But yeah, I mean, to Marilyn, to some of the comments in here, yeah, there's some balances to some of this as well. And keeping in mind here, what we're showing is just the GREET model and how the table responds. And it's a U.S. Department of Energy tool, not necessarily a U.S. Department of Ag tool. Now, there's some overlap and there's some tie-in here, but what we're displaying is here's just how the scoring system works. At Continuum Ag, we want to help our farmers to make sure that, number one, they're optimizing their profitability. Choose and go about these practices in a way that's going to help your family farm be more profitable and be more resilient and build up your soils in the correct manner, but also we've reverse engineered the scoring system here. We know exactly how each one of these line items moves the needle and improves your score.
Right. And, for us, it was a simple business exercise, right? Is the GREET model going to hurt our business? That's what we were trying to understand. And no, it actually lines up so precisely with what our advice looks like to most people that it's right that Mitchell's taken up this banner and trying to do everything possible in our power to do so, to kind of show what this is all about.
And my biggest thing on that is it's the general concept here is what I really like too. Okay. The GREET tool itself is what we're focused on here today, just because it's what's noted in the Inflation Reduction Act, not because I think it's the end all be all. What I think is absolutely where this goes is the concept here of documenting all the practices that are happening on your farm and running the environmental outcome metrics based on that. And today we're talking carbon, but it'll be water quality, biodiversity, water efficiency, like so many of these other environmental outcomes. But it still all mostly boils down to these same regenerative principles, being efficient, continuing to farm smart and use good agronomy, and then the marketplaces can be built on top of that. Now, this map here, though, just blows my mind every time. So explain what's going on here, because this is the county by county assessment of the GREET tool. If you guys can't tell, we've had a lot of fun digging into this and understanding how, at least today's version anyway, understanding how today's version of the tool works.
Yeah, so this was fun to build, but we need to explain the pinch of salt that needs to go with it, right? So here you can see your own county in here, and you can see whether it's a red county or a blue county. Now, this is not a political graph, but generally what's going on here is actually the way we set this up is we had our standard standard topsoil recommendations, right? And then we said, okay, if we use these recommendations all across the US in every single county, everything else remaining the same, right? And so this is a big pinch of salt here. It's very, very hard to make 200 bushels in North Dakota. But if we were to make 200 bushels, and if we were to use 160 units of nitrogen and whatnot, and ran this entire thing for different counties, what would our GREET score look like relative to the GREET score that they expect in the area, right? And so bluer areas means our practices would do better sort of in those areas, and the red ones means our practices might not do as well in those areas. Now, again, we still gotta defend this a little bit by saying, yeah, it's our inputs might not be exactly correct for out west in Nebraska, where we wouldn't necessarily make the same recommendations that we would do in central Iowa, right? And so given that, what does the model behave like on a national basis? And you can see there's a lot of orange in there where there's not a whole lot of corn, not a whole lot of data in there, but everywhere there is corn, there's quite a bit of data. And it does show that certain areas will behave better under these practices. I think the way I read this is there's more opportunity in the bluer areas than there is in the redder areas for our recommendations to actually work.
Yeah,
I'm not sure about that yet, but that's kind of how I see this.
Yeah, that it's the tool is more responsive. You can improve your score better more quickly with these same type of practices if you're in the blue counties versus if you're in the red counties.
Yeah, and that just might be because fewer people are already using it, and therefore the baseline is a lot smaller.
Baseline score. I think this is also where it's tying in some of those biogeochemical models. Obviously, tying in maybe some county average data. In the tool, you select the state and the county, and the numbers are then responsive based on that. You do not. There's some of those things that are plugged in that it doesn't account for. It doesn't directly account for your individual soil type, your individual rainfall, individual year to year kind of things. It's just overall county by county averages. Yeah, why red, Bob? I think it's for your corn huskers is what it must be. They wanted it to be. No, just kidding. I assume that the red out there is mostly based on moisture. I think this is probably mostly based on moisture stuff, but then the Kansas thing doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Then why would Kansas not also be very red colored, or like the Texas and Oklahoma stuff? So maybe, Kaustubh, on your thoughts like that, it's like some of the county defaults that are in there or the availability of data. But even if you look county by counties right next to each other, but in the Nebraska versus Kansas line, like they're different. So we're going to have to dig into some of these things.
It's simple. I think we used yields relative to Washington, Iowa. And those yields are very hard to make, right? And remember, corn yield is the biggest influencer in this model. And so, the expense of making a 200 bushel yield in, out west in Kansas or in North Dakota is going to negatively affect the CI score. It's not appropriate for that kind of soil to make.
I see.
I think that's how I tend to read it. I played around a little bit with the CI scores. Now if we did want to go down this rabbit hole, what we needed to have done is like take the county averages of yields and then plug those in, right? But then we are at a loss because we don't know the county average inputs for each of those. And so it was kind of this, if you open that Pandora's box, you have to go all the way.
Which is probably part of like what some of the industry players or the ethanol companies or supply chains, it's part of what they likely need to do next, which is figure out their supply shed number or their actual county average numbers, or even better, work with their farmers directly and figure out kind of what is their actual baseline numbers. So yeah, there was some consistencies that we plugged in here because we started with Washington County, Iowa, that some of those numbers make the results a little funky in other areas.
Yeah. And again, this kind of analysis is important for the Koch brothers of the world, right? And it's important for the ADMs of the world. It's less important to you as a grower because I think you're betting against your neighbors and your own existing practices. Yeah. And that's really where.
That's right. It's your individual number that's the most important, and your number compared to those that you're competing with, essentially.
Right.
That's going into the same supply chain. My grain that might have a really low carbon intensity score is not going to go to Western Nebraska and directly compete against a producer out there. It's just not going to be logistically feasible.
Right. And actually, that's probably another thing is probably the transportation costs and refinery costs and things like that might actually be affecting those numbers either.
So, and real quick, do we know why there's so many of these counties that don't have any type of results, that nothing shows up on? Do we know?
You mean the orange?
Yeah.
Yeah, the orange is right in the middle. That means there's no different data. It's sort of just the defaults.
So if you farm in Kansas or farm in California versus farm in Louisiana, your numbers are going to show in the same, or farm in North Dakota for the most part.
The model doesn't seem to be sensitive to those things, at least at the inputs that we tried, right? So that's at that 0.97 number there.
Yeah. So and obviously here they would have focused first on where the ethanol plants are. That's number one. This is a fuel model and a U.S. Department of Energy model. So they would be focused on those certain kind of counties. But yeah, interesting. So all the ones that don't have a different blue or red hue to them, they just all respond the same is what.
There's just no difference in their data, I guess.
Interesting. Okay, so getting a little bit on now what we've been doing with that.
Yeah, so how do we actually help the grower with this, right? So TopSoil, our tool actually helps simplify the documentation, recommendation, and calculations for the grower, right? So it's all about the data. Anyone who is trying to get the benefit of this 45Z tax credit needs to be able to produce the data. And really that's, if you don't capture the data, you can't play. Doesn't matter if it's this one or some next one in the future, it's just not going to happen, right? So the stakes are set. Table stakes are that everyone has to have good data on there. But TopSoil helps take that data and very quickly onboard the data into our system. So in under 30 minutes, you can put in your corn and beans plans for your entire operation. No matter if it's 160 acres or 16,000 acres, it doesn't matter. It's the same amount of time it would take mostly. And you can enter, you've seen these kinds of questions. It's going to ask you about what your application is and how much do you apply and when do you typically apply it for your typical corn program and so on. And then essentially TopSoil computes the GREET score for your typical application, right? And this is a number that you can start from. It's not specific to any field. It's not specific, but it is generally going to be close for your for individual fields that you farm.
Which I think is really where we need to be for right now. My approach to this is there's a lot of dust that still has to settle when it comes to 45Z, the Inflation Reduction Act, the marketplaces as they develop. There's not a direct market for me to go and sell my low carbon intensity grain to today. It looks like it's coming. I need to be ready for it. I want to make sure that our customers are ready for it. But even just knowing your corn standard number and your soybean standard number, that's kind of good for right now. And that's what we're showing here. And what's super cool, we just recently launched our fully automated process to doing that. We are charging customers to run this score. We spent a lot of time and money and effort to build all this out. And it's super valuable to know this number and just to have a general idea of where's your farm stack up today. And then, we've reverse engineered the scoring system like we showed before. So based on where you are today, we can help you and your agronomist with, okay, hey, how do I improve this score? What should I do next to set my operation up for these opportunities if and when they present themselves to my operation? And just running the values too based on the total top line value of the 45Z tax credit. We do not yet know what the actual value will be on an acre by acre basis. All we know is what the 45Z says within the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's the current math that we're looking at, which basically just states the lower your carbon intensity score, the more of these tax credits that the biofuel manufacturer is going to be able to earn. We don't know exactly what the value of the resale value and the actual cash value. We don't know what that is going to be yet. But the key thing here is just, okay, hey, we can make it really simple to figure out what is your baseline today if you're a grower, or what's your baseline if you're a manufacturer or you have a supply shed. Just figuring out where are you at today, what's your score, and then what are the opportunities to improve that score and to work it down for the emerging marketplaces to happen. Also, again, keeping in mind that, the tool isn't perfect, and I'm sure it's going to be updated very intensely over the coming years. And there's the way that I look at this. There is multi-billions of dollars in marketplace opportunity riding on top of this. So they're going to need to really crank that up and improve the certainty there. So, but just trying to make it easy for a grower.
Yeah.
I've been searching for so long. I'm like, what the heck is my farm's carbon footprint? And this doesn't completely tell my entire story. But when we plug our data into this, our score is negative 4.4. So at least now I have a pretty solid idea of what my metric is. I've got a pretty good idea of how I can work to improve that metric. It is definitely not gospel. And I need to get my score for every individual nitty-gritty detail of every single field, which is what we're doing now. And we've really simplified that system here like we're showing. And but at least gives that scoreboard and the talking point.
Right. Yep.
Then real quick on Bill's question, can a grower bank their values over time and improve the value 2x or 3x in the future? No, your score is tied to the field and tied to the production on the field. So you wouldn't like bank it or nothing. It's just in that given growing season or for that crop, here's everything that went into that crop. And then therefore, here's the carbon intensity of that crop. So it's not necessarily a bankable thing. We don't know what will happen in terms of the bankability of the tax credits, the value of the tax credits, the cash value of the tax credits. But it's the tax credit goes to the biofuel manufacturer, not necessarily to the farmer. The farmer opportunity is lower your carbon intensity on a field by field basis, improve your production on a field by field basis. Therefore, you have a low carbon intensity product to sell into the marketplace. And again, today it's corn and soybeans, and the GREET tool itself only has a couple crops in it. We're kind of brush real quick. Corn, soybeans, Milo,
sugarcane, Canadian
only
corn.
A couple things. It's only a couple
and
things.
Rice.
And I'm sure there will be more that get added into it, but today it's only a couple crops, and it just gives that initial basic score.
Right.
So I can kind of hit on this one. What my approach to this is just, again, making sure the farmers know how to really optimize and improve that score. We've taken what Cowshed was shown before of that sensitivity analysis of the tool, and I've worked to bake that into the recommendation process here. It's just showing growers, hey, here's your score today. Here's the low-hanging fruit to optimize your score, but it's up to you on whether or not you want to actually implement those practices or how far you want to take this. I think our other opportunity here is to make sure that we're cross-correlating the cost of improving that score, which is again our unique opportunity here. All of our recommendations up to this point have focused on bottom line profitability. What's the cost of that application in regards to the yield impact and the actual bottom line profit impact? Now we just take that a step further to say, what's the cost of improving that metric within the score? And as long as it's ROI positive and it works from an agronomic perspective, cool. There we go. We can do that. But I think the opportunity here to be able to just show farmers that they're in the driver's seat, which is really my intent. Farmer be in the driver's seat, know what it takes to improve your score, and just be in position to control your data and know how to optimize it, know what it's worth, and make sure that you get your fair share. We don't know what that fair share is going to be. I think it could be worth a lot of money. I'm really hoping that it's going to be worth a lot of money. I think we're all going to do really well if that's the case. But it's the concept here of the data is going to be crucial. We got to document everything. We got to be able to back it up and make sure that it's verifiable. And we can show you basically the low-hanging fruit to improve this score, but not just get the lowest score at all cost. Here's the optimum decision from an agronomic and an environmental perspective.
So
Okay.
one other thing, Mitchell, can you touch upon the point that the 45Z tax credit has a limited time window?
Yeah. So
bankability is harder in that kind of a situation.
That's right. So 45Z is still what I am really watching in regards of what I think is going to really drive these initiatives, and what's prompted us to really go head first into all this. 45Z currently in the Inflation Reduction Act says that it applies to renewable fuels produced after December 31st, 2024, meaning January 1st, 2025, through the end of 2027. But renewable fuel produced in 2025 is produced with crops grown in 2024. Those crops grown in 2024 are using the practices being deployed in this fall of 2023. Your tillage, your cover crop, your fertilizer. That's why we're pushing on this so early, even though there's a lot of dust to settle. I just want to make sure that everyone understands how big of an opportunity this can potentially be. And if we wait too long, we could miss the boat. And because it's only a couple year program, we got to make sure that as like the biofuel companies need to make sure that they can optimize it and leverage these credits from the very onslaught on January 1st, 2025. And therefore we got to have that the crop growing into that be as low as possible. Now with this and my buddy Bill Belden being on here, we're talking mostly corn and soybeans. There are metrics in there and other versions of tools for other crops, the switchgrass and the stuff like that, or other cellulosic ethanols. Like there's the same concepts apply, and 45Z applies to any biofuels, not necessarily corn ethanol, soybean biodiesel. It's any different renewable fuel like that or biofuel. But my takeaway here, and we'll finish up with some more questions. We're going to have to document everything that happens. And we've been really working diligently on being able to help to make that simple, because we're going to have to prove it. Like we help with the verification, work with our third-party verifiers, and we're working through the process of what that's going to entail. It's going to be a big lift. I mean, if we want to garner big value for this stuff, we're going to have to prove that we are providing big value. So we're going to have to document here with the shape files. Document with shape files, document with receipts and satellite imagery and all that stuff. Make sure that you're owning your data and know what the value in it is. But some other stuff, we're going to be hosting some more webinars on this and about 45Z as it continues to evolve. We've got a webinar coming up with our buddy Dr. Jerry Hatfield on May 22nd. That one's at 8 a.m. Sorry for some of the confusion here on today's time. We're going to be really working all this up to our June 5th TopSoil Summit. So that is where we really are kind of more publicly announcing everything that we're doing in this space, a lot of this stuff here, I'm too excited and I want to keep talking about it really early and keeping everybody fully up to date. We're going to be sending out a follow-up email after this. There will be a discount code in there. If you want to get your carbon intensity score, we can help you to do that. And again, it's just make sure that keep up on this. I think this is a huge opportunity for all of us. And it's really important to stay up on this one. So a couple other questions and stuff here. If there's any others, we've got a couple minutes. So maybe, raise your hand if you got one, or come off. You can ask CowsTube or myself questions. We'll try to answer as best as we can. Again, check out our YouTube page for some of the stuff in the past.
Or drop it in the chat.
Yeah, the chat. Yeah. So nitrogen is far more important from a GHG perspective than carbon. Actually, let's hit back on that one here, CowsTube, why the nitrogen is such a big driver. And it's because of nitrous oxide and what he's getting at with the point here.
Right. So nitrous oxide is 1,000 times more effective at the greenhouse gas process than is carbon
300.
dioxide, right?
300.
Okay. So it is shorter lived, and also the production of nitrogen is an energy expensive process too. So I think that also contributes to the GHG equivalence of nitrogen. And so yes, so I think that's really, fortunately, that's something we can control.
Yeah. So this is all in CO2 equivalents. Those GHG equivalents, CO2 equivalents. The unit is a carbon unit, CO2. But methane is nearly 30 times more potent a greenhouse gas, or has 30x the greenhouse gas potential than a ton of carbon. And nitrous oxide is nearly 300 times the greenhouse gas potential than CO2. So yeah, nitrogen fertilizer and reducing your nitrogen fertilizer has a big impact on this because of that conversion to nitrous oxide versus just looking at the CO2. And so definitely ties in. Some of the question on like cover crop and some of the details on that, Marilyn, it just looks at cover crop and no cover crop. It doesn't get into the details of the size of the cover crop, the species, the rate, the termination specifics. It doesn't get into that. It's very basic right now. Again, it's a U.S. Department of Energy tool. Where I'm seeing this going is just checking the box and saying we're doing a cover crop is not going to be enough. It's going to be some of the details like what you're getting at. It's going to be how much biomass do we have out there? When was it planted? When is it terminated? What was the actual weather happening, and modeling out the actual carbon drawdown of that cover crop, that above ground biomass. At a minimum, we're going to have to, I'm sure, show that cover crop is there from satellite imagery. And CowsTube, maybe you can speak to that real quick in terms of verification of some of these practices.
Yeah, so some of these practices can be verified readily, right? If you said you're going to do a cover crop, it's easily seen from a satellite. You can tell exactly when it emerged, when it was terminated, and how much biomass it might have accumulated over the cover cropping season. So I think some of that is more or less readily verifiable. Yes, it's quite expensive still at the moment with respect to compute costs. But if there are verification agencies out there who are going to share in that 45Z pie, then I think they're going to show up and they're going to help you get there.
Yeah. So, John, good point here on the 45Z starting at a CI of 50 and working its way down, and talk about the baseline score and stuff changing. I think to clarify on some of that, what we're getting at here. Okay, so overall fuels have to continue to work down their carbon intensity overall. You can do that with the blending and the REN system and some of this, like that's been around for a while. But lowering that baseline carbon intensity, if you're playing in a California market or other regulated markets, that baseline score does continue to work its way down. In 45Z, it's stable. 50 CI is the baseline. What we were getting at within that was speaking to the value of that reduction. What we believe will happen here is at the beginning, there's supply and demand in terms of the value of that low CI grain. Meaning, if I've got low carbon intensity grain that has a negative carbon intensity score, it's going to be more valuable today, potentially anyway, than what it would be in the future, because there's not as much grain in existence today that has a documented, verified low carbon intensity score. Most of the grain is at the standard. So my opportunity is I can probably get more of the share in the credit value because there's not that many people that are able to prove that they have a low carbon intensity grain. So today we can be more of a price maker saying, hey, you need my low carbon intensity grain and you need to share more of your dollars with me. Over time, there's more low CI grain because it becomes a new standard, and therefore the incentive for these facilities to share could decrease over time. It's just a hypothetical thing. It's a short term. 45Z is relatively short term right now, so we don't know exactly how that model is going to play. But the point there being the first mover advantage, and first mover advantage, having a low carbon intensity grain should be able to position us to make sure that we get a bigger value in terms of the dollar value share in that low carbon grain. Hopefully that helps and makes sense. But yeah, I'm sure over time, the target will be a moving target. So say they renew 45Z beyond 2027, very good chance 50 won't be the baseline. It'll be 45. Be the baseline. You have to have your CI below 45 in order to earn the credits. Just again, hypothetical, but I could very much see that being the thing. Walter had asked something on green methanol on the scores there. There's other models that Argonne has developed for other fuels, like the for butane and other renewable natural gas and stuff like that. There's other models out there. There's some info on that within the Argonne website. Justin had put some more stuff in the chat. Justin runs our customer success for a team. Avoided oh yeah, so the nitrous oxide emissions. So yeah, John, another good point. So it's not just looking at the nitrous oxide emissions in the field, but also the production of nitrogen is very energy intensive, and that is factored in, and that's why it's different based on the different products that were noted in there. There was a different breakdown of that. I'm sure some of that is tied in. And yeah, so green ammonia is one of the things. So Caleb put a note in there on that. It does ask if you're using a green ammonia versus using a synthetics. That is factored in the score. It does change the score a little bit.
Right.
Couch, anything else you're seeing? The livestock one can definitely can address that.
Yeah, so I think it's going to cascade out to everyone, right? So I think livestock is going to have the same kinds of considerations for greenhouse gas production through their production facilities. So buying greener feedstock is going to be helpful to them too.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, for those what I'm foreseeing here, most of my grain today goes into the pork industry. And if my grain is more incentivized to go into a renewable fuel space, if the dollar is going to be better for me, like I've got to do what's right economically for my family farm. But I see the opportunity there being for the pork industry or other verticals to say, hey, well, we need to show our low carbon story, and maybe we can develop some marketplace mechanisms to be able to do that and be able to compete to keep those commodities in their supply chain. Another key thing to note here too, though, is when my grain goes to the ethanol plant, it's not just ethanol that comes out to go into a gas tank. There's DDGs and corn oil and other products that do end up in the human food supply chain. So we need to factor that in as well. But again, it's the concept here of documenting everything that's going on, turning that into these environmental scores, and having that score be connected with your product in the supply chain. That is just where I think all this goes. It's not carbon being an asset on its own, or these environmental attributes being an asset on their own. It's tying that in your supply chain so that the companies that you're working with, the financial systems that you're in, they're able to claim that what they're doing and the product that they're developing has a positive environmental outcome, or at least a relative positive environmental outcome. So thanks, guys. Jumping off. Maybe one more here from Bob and we'll let everyone go. value of water quality benefits and wildlife benefits be monetized from conservation. Yeah, Bob, I think these other outcomes will end up potentially having marketplaces develop around them for water quality, flood mitigation, biodiversity, nutrient density. Again, I absolutely see that to be where this is going. And from my perspective, I just want to help farmers to document everything that we're doing on our farms. That's the key. We're going to have to document everything that we do. Today, we're running this great score on it. But with that same data, it can be plug it into other tools to run other scores as well. The Russell 2 equation, or even the current biogeochemical models like DACENT and DNDC and SALIS. Like, it's just, again, that data that is going to be super valuable. Next time with Dr. Hatfield, we're going to dig into some more of the nitty gritty science within some of the stuff as well. We'll definitely have to dig back into the nitrous oxide components and the actual soil carbon influences here. But Caster, any parting thoughts? I think this has been really hopefully very informative to everybody. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We had an awesome group on here. But Caster, any parting thoughts? So thank you for spending the time with us here.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was fun to share a little bit of what we do. And I think, again, we can't stress enough, if we don't got the data, we can't play in any of these things. So it doesn't matter what comes out in the front, right? So I think that's really the key message here is document everything. And sooner or later, it's going to pay off because the demand is certainly out there now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're not able to show that you're better than the baseline or the standard, you're the standard by default. So again, yep, I think that's a great point. Thanks, everybody.